Naturally enough, we're scared of big changes and just want help with this little eensy bad habit. We tend to see symptoms like these as something alien, something that could be removed if we found the right pill or surgical knife. We have tremendous resistance to understanding that these habits are deeply ingrained in us. But they are. They're part of our character. They're often the visible manifestation of some complex inner conflicts. Or they can reveal prejudices, assumptions, and feelings we'd rather not admit. Most important, as we've developed our self-destructive habits, our character has been warped by them. We've gotten to depend on rationalizing, lying to ourselves about the implications of what we do and how we hurt ourselves and others. But there simply is no way to stop a bad habit, other than smoking, which seems to be only a pure addiction, without facing what it means and what it's done to you. If you have ever learned something that takes practice, typing, playing a video game, driving a car, you can use the same methods to get to know yourself and overcome your damaging and unwanted behavior. The scenarios of self-destruction include the influence of unconscious beliefs and assumptions that are simply wrong or wrong in the current context, unconscious fears of success, independence, love, passivity, a lack of agency, not understanding that we have the power to change, a habitual rebellion against authority, an unconscious self-hate, a compulsion to gamble, to play with the limits and see how much we can get away with, a desire for someone to care enough to stop us, a belief that the usual rules don't apply to us, a feeling that we've done our best and there's no point in trying any longer, an addiction. Each scenario can lead to behavior patterns that range from mildly self-destructive, like procrastination or disorganization, to severe, like self-injury or substance abuse. In my experience, the severity of consequences bears almost no relationship to the difficulty of breaking the pattern. Another piece of the confusion is that people may have the same overt pattern of self-destructive behavior, but we each may be following a different scenario to get there. Same behavior, different causes. While I may procrastinate largely because I resent being told what to do, Joe may do it because he secretly hates himself and doesn't believe he deserves success. Jane may procrastinate because she's afraid of how success might change her life, while Jason may be convinced that he's so talented he can pull it all together at the last minute. Just because people seem to follow the same pattern does not mean they have the same motives and rewards. It's vitally necessary, if you want to control your own self-destructive habits, that you understand the scenario that's got you under its spell. But just understanding it is not sufficient. You have to learn new skills and habits that will be more effective in helping you be who you want to be. These skills, mindfulness, self-control, confronting fear, freeing yourself from mindless guilt, and others, are described in detail in the chapters to come, with an exercise at the end of each chapter. You'll need to practice these new skills regularly until they become second nature to you. None of them are difficult, but you'll need patience and determination to stay with your practice. This will be easier because you'll start to benefit from them right away. But then you still have the undertow to deal with. The undertow is my term for the mysterious force that sabotages our best efforts when we're just on the edge of victory. The awful truth is that most of our efforts at self-reform, even those that meet with great initial success, will fail within 2 years and send us back where we started. Something keeps sucking us back in. You stay on your diet and lose 40 pounds, but then you have a bad week and you're doomed. Within just a few months, you put back on all the weight you struggled so hard to lose, and you've added evidence to your belief that you're hopeless. We can't overcome this undertow by doing only what we already know how to do. We have to change some basic assumptions about ourselves and modify some habits that we don't yet understand are part of the problem. So, overcoming bad habits isn't always easy, especially those that have been with you for years. But let's look now at what new science has learned that will make it much less difficult for you. Inside the brain. Neuroscientists have now shown that if we simply practice good habits, our brains will grow and change in response, with the result that these good habits become easier and easier. When we do anything repeatedly with focused attention, our nerve cells will physically grow new connections between, say, nerve center A, go to the gym, and nerve center B, stay at the gym until your workout is done. Nerves A and B develop a stronger connection with more transmitting and receiving points, and going to do our workout becomes a habit with a physical embodiment in the brain. Neurons that fire together wire together. We forget our aches and pains and distractions and do it. And every time we do it, we make it easier to do tomorrow. A few years ago, some scientists taught a group of college students how to juggle and, using some fancy new tools, observed their brains while they learned. After 3 months of daily practice, the subjects' brains showed visible growth in gray matter. Then the students were instructed not to practice for 3 months, and all that growth disappeared. What would happen in your brain if you were able to prevent your own signature self-destructive pattern in thinking, in feeling, in your actions for 3 months? 3 solid and consistent months is a long time, longer than we want it to take to make major changes in our lives. We not only expect to lose a lot of weight, we also expect that after 3 months we won't be so hungry anymore. If we stop gambling or drinking, we expect that after 3 months we won't be tempted anymore. Maybe that's just unrealistic thinking. After all, you wouldn't expect to become a skilled juggler after only 3 months. We have to give ourselves the latitude of more time and more consistent practice for our efforts to pay off. Maybe part of the undertow is that we start thinking we've won when the battle is only half over. In fact, there's evidence that the brain changes much more quickly and mysteriously than the study on juggling indicates. Alvaro Pascual Leone, a researcher at Harvard, had volunteers practice a simple one-handed piano exercise for 2 hours a day for 5 days. Then he looked at their brain activity. What he found was that in only 5 days, the area of the brain that controls those fingers was enlarged and enriched. However, he then divided the piano players into 2 groups. One of the groups continued practicing for 4 weeks, the other stopped. Among the group who stopped practicing, those changes in brain mapping had disappeared. Most extraordinary, perhaps, was that there was a third group who only mentally practiced the piano exercise while holding the hand still. This group showed almost exactly the same brain changes after 5 days as the group who had really practiced. So we have evidence that the brain begins to change almost immediately with practice, whether real or imagined. But those changes will disappear if we don't keep practicing. The fact that mental rehearsal affects the brain almost exactly like physical rehearsal is very good evidence that your internal pep talks, your efforts at mindfulness, thought control, and willpower, all techniques we'll discuss, will achieve their desired effect. The discovery that the brain changes physically in response to our life experience is the biggest news in psychology in decades. Neuroscientists know now that all habits have a physical existence in the structure of the brain. Their early traces were laid down in childhood and adolescence. As we practice bad habits more and more, they become like railroad tracks, the only way to get from here to there, from stress to relief, and we ignore the fact that there are much healthier and more direct ways of getting what we need. So under stress, we take a drink, or have a snack, or pick a fight, or get depressed, all without awareness that we have made a decision. Our bad habits operate unconsciously. This is one of the forces behind the undertow. It's so difficult to overcome bad habits because they are etched in the brain. They don't go away as we practice better behavior, they just fall into disuse, so they can easily be revived. We don't tear up the old tracks when we build new ones. We just let them get rusty and weedy. For example, say you've been eating unhealthily for years. You start out on a diet hoping to lose 10 pounds in 2 weeks. When you don't, you get discouraged and give up. But you wouldn't expect to learn to play the guitar after only a few weeks' practice, or speak a foreign language, or type like a master. Yet because we know perfectly well what we have to do to change ourselves, and it seems so simple, we expect to overcome a lifetime of bad habits in only a few weeks. As Alcoholics Anonymous says, just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. Habits die hard. Each time we engage in a bad habit, we make it more likely we'll do it again in the future. But in the same way, each time we engage in a good habit, we make it more likely that we'll do it again. You can learn to program your own brain so that making the right choices and exercising willpower comes to seem easy and natural. Focused attention and practice, repeated over and over, will change the brain's reward system so that bad habits will lose their appeal and be replaced by new, self-constructive behavior patterns. An important implication of these discoveries is the fact that learning is never lost. When we're trying to break a bad habit by practicing more constructive behavior, eating right, exercising, being assertive, we can easily be discouraged by a bad day. We can give up and feel that we've wasted a lot of effort, but that's not the case. Every day you practiced left its traces in the brain. You can get back on the horse after a fall and expect it soon to be as easy and rewarding as ever. New brain imaging tools have led to another revolutionary discovery: adult brain cell generation. Until just a few years ago, it was a basic doctrine of neurology that adult humans don't grow new brain cells. In fact, we were thought to be losing cells continually after childhood. Now we know that the brain produces new cells all the time. Deep in the brain, there are colonies of rapidly dividing stem cells, which can migrate outward and replace any specialized cell in the brain. We also know that learning stimulates this cell division. We learn in both the conscious and the unconscious by growing and enriching the connections between nerve cells. Practicing what we've learned seals the connections between the new cells and the existing ones. Qualities we assumed were more or less fixed from an early age, intelligence, morality, coordination, can grow, shrivel, or morph into something either twisted or strong and beautiful. It all depends on our experience. As the people behind acceptance and commitment therapy point out, most of your problems have been with you for a long time, maybe since childhood or adolescence. That suggests that normal human problem-solving methods, if they were going to be effective on your self-destructive behavior, would have helped by now. It stands to reason that you might have to abandon some of the ways you struggle with your behavior. In fact, maybe the way you struggle has become part of the problem. Inside the mind. It's just about impossible to explain self-destructive behavior without some concept of the divided self, of motives and feelings that we hide from ourselves, of a part of the mind that sometimes works against our own best interests. It's like trying to explain the movement of the planets in our solar system while ignoring the gravitational force of the sun. Our automatic selves and our thinking selves affect each other with great force, usually beneath our awareness, and the result can be unnecessary misery. The conscious self is largely in the new brain, neocortex. It's what evolution gave humans that separates us from animals. It's the part of the brain that is involved in deliberate reasoning. It reflects on our experience and hopefully makes thoughtful decisions on what's good for us and what to avoid. Compared to the unconscious, it's much more open to new information and able to be flexible in its response. It's what enables us to be patient, take the long view, plan for the future, and not respond instinctively to whatever is going on right now. When we think of ourselves, we're thinking of this part of the brain. We like to think we're in charge and that we live our lives deliberately. But in fact, our decision-making and reasoning are deeply influenced by the unconscious. When Freud introduced the concept of the unconscious mind more than 100 years ago, it was one of those ideas that changed the world. Freud's unconscious is now part of our everyday thinking. When we forget someone's name or miss an appointment, we wonder if it was a Freudian slip. We know that we deny or repress uncomfortable facts and memories. We know that our dreams are messages from our unconscious. We can see others being defensive. We don't expect them to fully understand their own motives. While much of the Freudian technique of psychoanalysis has fallen by the wayside, the idea of the unconscious has permanently changed the way we understand ourselves. But now we think of the unconscious as something much bigger than Freud envisioned. It includes things like motor skills and perception, systems that evolved before consciousness developed. It includes many things that were never repressed, but that were learned unconsciously, prejudice, for instance, or pessimistic thinking. It includes much from social psychology, how our perception is affected by assumptions, our self-image, and the current environment. A lot of interesting stuff about the human mind, judgments, feelings, motives, occur outside of awareness for reasons of efficiency and not because of repression. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning developer of behavioral economics, calls this System 1 thinking and refers to it as lazy because it's habitual and not creative. Timothy Wilson, in his wonderful book Strangers to Ourselves, refers to the adaptive unconscious. I prefer to call it the automatic self. We can, if we want to, focus our conscious minds on much of the automatic self, though this can just complicate things for us. Imagine trying to walk if you had to think through every muscle movement. We depend on the automatic self for 99% of getting through the day, and on the whole, it's pretty reliable. On the other hand, the conscious self, Kahneman's System 2, kicks in automatically when we are faced with a difficult problem or a moral dilemma, or when we want to be careful about how we are seen by others. It takes your conscious mind to realize that you have a self-destructive habit. The thinking brain becomes aware that your suffering has been caused by actions you didn't think about.